I'm Dean, I'm the dad.
I'm Laura, I'm the mom.
And I'm Krystalyn, I'm the daughter.
And together we are Family Plot. Not too bad. How's everybody today?
Well, that one's down. I'm sick.
You know, I think like everybody is, like your sister Blue brought home the illness and spread it to everybody. Everybody. Which, you know, just goes to reinforce my theory that children are germ donkeys.
I'm sorry. Sometimes I wish that we had screens because I'm literally sitting here looking across the living room. And the Munchkin, the littlest child, has a tent that looks like a castle tower. And she has put her little wooden chair into the center of this. I look up behind Krystalyn and through the little window of the tower, I see our male cat Obsidian and our female grand cat Shion aggressively bathing each other and like writhing around each other through the window. And I wasn't sure whether I should
disclose that or just keep it a
video
secret.
it and put it on TikTok for you know,
just leave it on the table for us to
turn away.
Yeah, turn away.
Yeah, just let it go.
It felt a little inappropriate.
And Krista, I know that you didn't have a great day. Your stomach was upset.
Yeah, no, every time I walk into the hallway and I smell anything like that rubber smell from the gym.
Yeah.
My stomach depletes and it's just like, nope, battery low.
Well, let's get into it at least a little bit. Let's see. We can always use help. In fact, we just had to buy $15 worth of pellets for the Grand Bunny, so, you know.
That bunny, my goodness gracious, they eat us out of house and home if we ain't careful.
Well, I'm just saying, you know, if you want to help us with the bunny or just help us in general, you can do that through Patreon. There's Team Bunny, Team Spa Day, Team Podcast. Doesn't really matter what you donate to. It all helps us out. That's a monthly donation. We keep it fairly light, 1, 3, 5, and maybe 10. But if you can't do a monthly donation, hey, no hard feelings. You could also throw just a one-time donation to us through Buy Me a Coffee. Failing that, you know, if you can't do that, we understand. One thing, though, welcome to new listeners as well as the old. If this is your first time listening, thanks for joining us. Also, we do have sort of a contract we like to do with our listeners. On one hand, you know, if you enjoy the show, please share it on social media. It's easy. It's free. We appreciate that very much. If you don't like the show...
If you don't, keep it to yourself.
Exactly. Listen to our Krista. She knows exactly what she's talking about.
Because I've been doing this for a while. I've been here since the first episode.
You have.
Not to disclude Mom, because she has done well. She has done well within her time.
Like Thumper's father told him, if you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Tonight, we travel back in time, spiritually, if nothing else, to the 1400s. I mean, our show on time travel didn't teach us how to actually time travel.
Unfortunately.
I'd be the doctor. I would. Anyway, we travel back in time, figuratively at least, to the 1400s in France, where we meet a French noble and a marshal who was a colleague of Joan of Arc. And after the 100 Years' War, he engaged in a despicable series of crimes that only came to light after an argument with a priest. Tonight, we fulfill our goals of history and true crime as we examine the potentially fiendish Gilles De Rais.
Ooh. I think. Potentially.
Wasn't Joan of Arc bad
One
guy?
of the stake. No, she wasn't a bad guy.
Joan of Arc was interesting, and we may cover her on the show sometime, but basically she was a French peasant that claimed that God spoke to her, and God told her how to win these battles. And so Joan would lead troops, French troops, in these battles in the 100 Years' War to these successful attacks and whatnot. And then after she had done all this, right, the French people are like, well, she's not really talking to God. She's a witch. So they burned her at the stake.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like,
Disrespect.
Yeah, it didn't go over well.
Disrespect for the poor woman. I say rights for that poor woman.
well, very disrespectful. I mean, they were more than happy to have her help when she was winning. But once, the things had been settled, well, it was time to move her out of the equation as quickly as they could.
It's kind of like when the Americans had the war with the British, and then they all just split into separate parts.
Kind of.
They let her help, and then they got split, and they were just like, oh yeah, we remember why we don't like you.
Exactly.
It's
And
just
so,
that I'm actually learning something from social studies. Hi, if you're listening, Miss Black, hello.
Yeah.
You're right, I have learned something.
so, yeah. Anyway, she was. But first, before we get into. And by the way, his name is spelled Gilles. That's the first name. D-E, Ray. R-A-I-S. 3 names.
Yep.
But I specifically looked up the way to pronounce it, and it's Gilles De Rais, which basically is Gilles De Rais to me, but the French have a way of emphasizing the J sound a G can make that doesn't quite sound like an American J. So I apologize to the French. I'm going to call this guy Gilles De Rais a lot, but, please forgive me. So, but before we get into that, though, Krysta has facts.
Krysta, you
have facts.
Wonderful. I love
When
Krysta's
do I
facts.
not have facts on this?
Well, she's done a couple of shows where she didn't do facts, but they were like interviews or things like that, where it wasn't as so easy to
fit all that in there with what else was going on.
Right. But like she's only missed 2 episodes worth of facts since we've started doing them. So I mean, she's got a really.
I've been making. If you can't tell, I've been making up for those facts with extra facts.
Yeah.
Like, you know that time when I did 10 whole extra facts? I think that was for an episode.
Yeah.
Today's facts are about D&D because Mom just finished listening to a campaign.
Mom is a big fan of Critical Role.
And
Hi, Matt Mercer.
Mom is an epically big fan of Critical Role. Matt Mercer.
And Dad keeps picking
Laura
on
Bailey. Travis Willingham. Sam Riegel. Liam O'Brien. And Chelsea Jackson. Oh, and Marissa Ray. Love, love, love all of them.
And Dad keeps picking on her about going to the next campaign, and Mom's just like, relax, god darn it!
I'm not picking on her. I'm just asking about it.
So many times
I've asked her twice.
She has to recover.
That's right. I have to recover.
I've asked her twice.
That is a lot for her. After that,
I've asked her twice in 3 days.
yeah, that's still a lot.
That's not even once a day.
That seems like a lot.
It seems like a lot for her because she still has emotional damage from what happened at the end of those episodes. Like, Mom cried 2 nights in a row.
I did. There was much sobbing to be had. I guess I should be happy that he cares about things I care about, and so we'll quit giving Dad a hard time.
I'm giving him a hard time.
For
Because
now.
he was giving you a hard time. Also, I just like people giving people hard times. Anyway.
Well, you come by that honestly. You are my daughter.
Sorry. I have a song coming in my head now.
That was only slightly confusing. Okay.
It's a hard time, but terrible. Anyway.
So, you were gonna tell us some facts.
Yes, about Dungeons and Dragons.
Woohoo!
Oh, wait, that deserves extra clap.
One of my favorite topics.
And we're thinking about doing something with that. Don't we? Yeah.
Absolutely. Super excited. More to come.
We don't talk about that yet. Just a little bit of information for you guys.
It's called a teaser.
Yep, teaser. But it's not the teaser trailer. It's just
No, just a teaser.
Yeah.
You were saying.
Anyways,
Mm-hmm.
today's facts are from CompleteSet.com by Chuck Moore. Thank you, Chuck Moore. You are appreciated, even though this was made in 2015, and it was a really long time ago.
2015 was a really long time ago. Did you hear that?
I did hear that.
It feels really long ago because we're in 2022 now, like the end of the year. How long has this show been here? A year or something?
More like 2. We started in 2020.
Wow. A good way to cope with your feelings. Anyway. Sorry.
It's okay.
I got distracted with a picture of a goblin on my phone.
Cool.
It was a D&D goblin.
Well,
I'm so
yeah.
sorry.
Isn't that the topic that we're talking about? Pretty sure that's what you said.
Yes.
Anyway, fact number one. Also, guess what?
What?
Extra facts today.
Woo!
Yay!
You know I like that.
I like that as well.
Dungeons and Dragons began a really long time ago. Not only is Dungeons and Dragons abbreviated D&D, most people know that, credited with being the first role-playing game, but its origins date back to 1969, when Gary
Gygax.
met Dave Anderson at the second Gen Con, and the two expressed interest in working together to design the game. 2 years later, Gygax would pen chainmail, and Anderson would use those rules to take his players on their first adventures in his Blackmore fantasy campaign. This adventure would include the first forays into a dungeon filled with monsters in search of treasure. More recently, Dungeons and Dragons celebrated its 40th anniversary with a series of events in 2014. Not so recent anymore, but that's cool.
Yeah.
Still under 10 years ago. That's pretty recent.
Yeah. And then,
She's just trying to make us feel really old tonight here.
Yeah, well, I feel really old because she's not a 6-year-old anymore. So,
That
yeah.
is true.
no, I'm 13. I'm actually considered a teenager
We
now.
know. We know. Don't rub it in, will you?
I'm going not to.
Are you sure? It kind of felt like you were rubbing it in on purpose. I'm just saying.
I wasn't. I didn't do it. No.
Wow. I don't know that it's quite as long as you seem to be wanting to point out, but it has been around for a while, so that's pretty cool. What else you got for us?
Over those 4 decades, D&D has been owned 4 times.
Yeah?
The roots took shape in Lake Geneva?
Lake Geneva.
Like
Geneva. Thank you. I'm sorry, hold on. Geneva, right? Tactical Studies Association, a small local war games club. But Tactical Studies Rules was where it all began for Dungeons and Dragons. The first D&D set emerged in 1974 and adventured 3 booklets shipped in a wood grain colored cardboard box. Comprised of men and magic, monsters and treasure, and underworld and wilderness adventures. The first hand-assembled set sold out its 1,000 copy production run in just 11 months.
Not too bad.
Not too bad. Less than a year.
In the days prior to the internet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, hold on. From that initial publishing partnership, TSR Hobbies Incorporated took shape in 1975. TSR would later be purchased by Wizards of the Coast, best known at the time for Magic the Gathering. In June of 1997, not too long ago if you think about it, the most recent and 4th owner of the Hasbro in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. When Wizards of the Coast became a subsidiary of that company.
Mm-hmm. And it's kind of interesting that you bring that up because I actually just read a news story today that they just, in the last week or so, announced the new president for the Dungeons and Dragons portion of the Hasbro Corporation. So,
and this is good. I'm going to say something real quick for a little preview of what I'm going to do for my 120th episode. When I'm explaining myself, this is just a little preview for it. I, more recently, have been wanting to write, I forgot what it's called. Is it narrate? Isn't it writing? Writing is narrating? Or
Narrative.
Narrative?
Yeah.
Narrator?
Narrator, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I want to become a narrator for either plays or just books in general. But I also want to try to make my own, or do my own Dungeons and Dragons setup thing.
Campaign.
Yeah, that. Like a, what is it called? Dungeon Master. I want to do that. I want to write those, and I want to look into that because I feel like it would be fun, and I want to try to get into it.
It is fun, but it's also a lot of work.
Yeah, but if I do it, I might have a side job, but that's probably what I'll be focusing on mostly. Maybe if I become good enough, I'll be a good author. I want to become an author, but
Krysta, your dad has been a game master since I was in my teens, in one system or another. You've got all it takes, I promise you.
Mm-hmm.
You got talent.
But yeah, I as of recently, I've been wanting to write plays and stuff.
Cool.
So I think that'd be pretty cool. So I'm gonna write some stuff, and then I'll say a short story that I wrote on the 120th episode. If you're there for that, congratulations. That's in the future. I'll write it at some point, you know. Hold on, I'm sorry. My throat again. There's crud in the back of my throat.
Yeah,
I'm not
this stuff that Lexia's having.
Yeah, I understand.
And she's given it to all of us in some degree or another.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's number 3. Forget chess club, make mine D&D.
Absolutely.
In the game's early cultural heyday of the 1980s, it was not out of the question to see Dungeons and Dragons Club complete with club photos in select high school yearbooks across the country. Clubs still take huge shape across high school and college campuses today.
Cool.
Also, one of those ladies in the picture.
Okay.
In 84, 83 maybe, my ninth grade year in what was at the time our ninth grade was in junior high school, I started a D&D club at our school. It lasted about 6 months before the teacher that sponsored it decided not to sponsor it because she didn't like the aspect of monster fighting that's in D&D, and so she chose to back out, and we couldn't find another sponsor. But yeah, I was just head of a D&D club for a minute.
Nice.
So proud. No, I really am proud.
We're sure you are, Mom. Anyway. I'm so done with this already. Like, I've done this like 5 different times throughout this whole episode already. I'm done. Fact number 4. The first book-length biography of Gary Gygax, was it Gygax?
Gygax.
Wasn't published until 2015. Empire of Imagination, Gary Gygax, and the Birth of Dungeons and Dragons by Michael Whitwer. Yeah. That hit stores shelves on October 6th, 2015, and represents the first book-length biography detailing the life of this much loved and legendary co-founder of D&D.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
I will have to look into finding that book. That seems like it might be interesting.
Yes,
Yeah. Like I said, this stuff, D&D, and just stories in general inspire me. And while I don't like reading stories too much, or I just don't think I've ever, like, really had the time to feel like, I want to get to know myself and I want to be an author someday, because I haven't really thought about my career, but now that I'm thinking about it, I think writer might be a nice choice for me. Maybe.
Well, we know a couple of writers.
Yes, we do.
Well, Angelique Anderson.
Yes.
And your Uncle Danny, Dan B. Fierce.
Yes.
Yeah. I think I have her number on my phone, actually. If anyone has any, like, suggestions for me, I'll make sure the parental units tell me about that. Make sure to keep track of those, like, write them down or something.
All right.
Anyway, fact number 5, because I'm going to run out of breath and then I'm going to pass out, and no one wants me to do that.
Really not.
Time and studies soften critics' concerns despite that Tom Hanks film. As D&D found mass appeal, roughly 3 million players by 1981, over 750,000 copies sold per year by 1984.
Wow.
The game also found its critics and criticism from a mix of political and religious figures who found the imaginary and the imagery and references concerning. Now, 40 years later, over 20 million people have generated more than 1 billion.
Yep.
$1 billion in sales And the case can be made that the world hasn't suffered, but rather has seen its imagination grow following the game's creation. In fact, many credit the concepts first introduced here as playing a major influence in fiction. Film and video games that are still felt today. Additionally, investigations since that time has demonstrated that gamers have a lower suicide rate than non-gamers. Michael A. Stackpole, 1982, and countless studies have shown that positive effects of gaming, despite what Tom Hanks' character in Mazes and Monsters would have you believe.
That's a lot of word salad.
Yeah, and as you can tell, I was struggling to get through the last bit of it.
But
I think I was full.
so well. I was so proud of you.
I'm very proud of you. But yeah, at one point, there was a political and religious movement to shut down D&D as much as possible. It went nowhere. It's worth mentioning that the religious pamphlets that were handed out about it made no sense to anybody who ever played the game, because it was listed with all these quotes that supposedly came from the books, the game books, the Dungeon Master's Guide or whatever. And like, they would tell you what page this stuff was supposed to be on. So you'd go to look for it. It didn't exist. None of it did. But that apparently religious hucksters don't need to tell the truth to sell their snake oil. So that's always been my take on it.
I mean, some of them were just really offended by it, and I can understand where their perspective comes from, because, you know, a lot of people have totally different opinions, and that is fine, as long as, you know, you're respectful about what the other person thinks. But of course, they weren't necessarily respectful.
That was the issue.
They weren't necessarily respectful of that. So, like, I don't really support the fact that they're just trying to get that a little bit of money off of it. I don't really support that at all. Like, find a nice way to get you some money. That's fine. But, like, don't go sell. What is that called? What is that called?
I don't know. I don't know where you were going with that, my sweet.
Yeah, I'm not sure where you...
It's like, don't go blackmailing people. Something like that. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that.
Don't do that. That's not cool. That's not cool. Why were they handing that out to people who...
You don't have to be bullies. Because somebody has a different opinion than you do.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
We are definitely anti-bullying on this show.
Yeah, if you ever bully people... I mean, if you regret it now, I guess I sort of forgive you, but that person has to fully forgive you before I can forgive you fully. If you do still bully, you are hurtful. Please stop.
Yes. Alrighty. Good facts.
No.
Do we have extra facts?
Yeah, she already said.
I forgot there was a bonus fact or two. Go ahead.
Gary Gygax was a church-going Jehovah's Witness. Well, I said that right.
You did. I'm so proud of you.
As Michael Whitworth points out in that book we mentioned above, it is quite ironic that Gygax himself, while being decried by many in the media for creating a supposedly satanic game, was in actuality a fairly religious individual, and at times a door-to-door representative of the church.
Well, yeah, if he was a Jehovah's Witness, they have to at some point
requirement, I believe.
go door to door to spread the word. Because the Jehovah's Witness faith, like the people who buy into it, are amazing to me because they are so strongly faithful. They only believe that something like 25,000 people are going to heaven or some small number like that. But yet they still recruit because they're worried that they don't have all 25,000 of the people that are supposed to go to heaven as a member of the faith, which is just crazy to me. Because I know that if I were a Jehovah's Witness, I would be trying to get people out of the faith. How many people are going to heaven? You know, Bob, you're not a good person. You should leave. You should quit. That would be my move. But so I'm amazed by Jehovah's Witnesses.
We are respectful to the Jehovah's Witness. However, like I said, everyone has different opinions. I'm not going to state mine because this is not that kind of show. And I don't really want to bring my opinions out here just doing all that. So.
Alright.
Alright, well, that's the end of my facts today. Thank you for coming to my corner. I hope you enjoyed the little preview of the 120th episode when I will explain what I've done so far.
Great facts, babe. Thank you.
Awesome facts, Krysta. I tell you, though, people who play D&D commit suicide deaths, and actually I have a story that kind of goes with that. Matt Mercer was doing an interview, and I'm not sure with who he was doing it, but he was doing an interview about Critical Role in his life and what took him to that point and all that.
The one we were listening to together?
Yeah.
It was with the guy, it was with Ashley's... I can't think of his name. Anyway, go ahead. Anyway,
he talked about one of his proudest moments about Critical Role was when he got an email, or Geek and Sundry, I guess, got the email, but they forwarded it to him. And it was basically a guy that was going to commit suicide. And he had it all set up and everything. And then he listened to an episode of Critical Role, and he wanted to hear what happened next week. So he canceled everything he had set up to go commit suicide, and he listened next week, and he was so infatuated that he canceled again. And eventually he just stopped setting up committing suicide because he was that big a fan of Critical Role, which makes me think that he probably is at least something of a gamer, or if not, maybe he's gotten into it by now. And I find that the game has that power to be amazing.
I think it does too.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, congratulations again, Krysta. That was great. Yeah, I'm your facts lately have been just off the charts.
On point.
Yeah.
I would hope so, because I'm trying really hard, especially with school coming back and stuff.
Let's talk about Gilles De Rais. And again, if I get this wrong, French people, I apologize. Gilles De Rais was born on an unknown date, and the best guess puts it at late 1405. He was born to Guy II of Montmorency-Laval and Marie de Craon at Champtos on the Loire, which was the name of the castle, Champtos on the Loire. Now, his father died in a gruesome hunting accident that Gilles may have witnessed in 1415. So he was about 10 years old at the time. His mother died later that same year, though history doesn't record how. Gilles and his brother were given to his maternal grandfather, Jean de Craon.
Like crayon? Like,
C-R-A-O-N.
So, like crayon?
Crayon is C-R-A-Y-O-N.
Oh.
Like a...
Yeah. This all takes place in print. Yeah.
No. Sounds like a crayon bread.
Now, the thing about Jean was he was a bit of a schemer. Some of the sources I looked into called him an old schemer. And he attempted to marry 12-year-old Gilles off to 4-year-old Jean Paynel, one of the richest heiresses in Normandy. And Krysta, marrying off a 12-year-old in Middle Ages was not uncommon.
Yeah, but to a 4-year-old, come on.
Yeah, no best.
That might be a little bit of a push.
No best.
Even in the Middle Ages. Come on now.
No best.
For royalty, no.
No best.
To a 4-year-old?
They wouldn't have held the marriage till she was 12. But betrothing them? Oh, yes.
Oh, well, betrothing, that's different. But you said married, so I was confused. Okay, I'm good
bestie. No.
Now, when that fell through, he attempted to negotiate his grandson's marriage to Beatrice de Rohan, the niece of the Duke of Brittany. This was also unsuccessful. In 1420, he finally married his grandson off to Catherine de Thouars of Brittany, the heiress to La Vendée and Poitou. They had one child, a daughter named Marie, 13 years later.
Wow, that took a while.
Well, I don't know how much they interacted, and we'll get into that kind of. Here's the problem. This is 1400s. We've lost a lot of information since then.
Fair enough.
Over 600 years ago, as we're talking about.
Yeah.
Now.
It's been a minute.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
Gilles began his military career some years later. Basically, after the 100 Years' War, the Duke of Montfort's grandfather, Duke John the Sixth, was taken prisoner by Oliver de Blois. And the Blois faction took him prisoner because they wanted power. And so they wanted the Duke of Montfort to give power to rescue this uncle. Well, Jean de Craon took the Duke's side, as did Gilles. And so after it was all settled and Duke John VI was rescued, both were rewarded with gifts of land for their good and honorable service. And those gifts of land were then converted into monetary gifts.
I see.
So they were doing pretty well, which that's something else we have to talk about. 1400s, if you were not born royalty, you had one choice. If you didn't want to spend your life farming for some rich twit. And that was the church. That was it.
Very rich twit. But anyway, go ahead.
Not for peasants. Peasants couldn't marry rich twits.
I guess that's true.
Peasants could become a priest. That was really it. That was the only route to power they had, and not everyone could do that. In fact, most people were kind of like, they were uneducated. Now, they knew enough to farm because that was passed down word of mouth, family to family, but they didn't know much else.
Right.
So he eventually joined the entourage of King Charles VII somewhere around 1425. He may have been actually introduced at the palace somewhat earlier, but 1425 is the first time we know he appeared with King Charles VII at the battle for the Chateau de Lude, which is the House of Lude. And I don't know who Lude was, but anyway, at that battle, he captured or killed the English Captain Blackburn, and we don't know which he did for sure. Blackburn isn't mentioned after that, but it wouldn't be surprising for him to have only been captured and then taken a hit to his reputation to where he was not allowed to command, and so he may have withdrawn to live alone, and we would not know.
Fair.
Now, on 17th of July, 1429, Gilles De Rais was one of 4 lords chosen for the honor of bringing the holy ampulla from the Abbey of St. Remy to Notre Dame de Reims for the consecration of Charles VII as King of France. On the same day, he was officially created a Marshal of France. Now, at this time, he had also been fighting in the 100 Years' War and helping to support Joan of Arc. And we've already talked a little about Joan of Arc in that she was eventually burned at the stake or whatever. But he served several campaigns with her. Now, following the siege of Orleans, Gilles de Rais, was granted the right to add a border of the royal arms, the fleur-de-lis on azure ground, to his own shield, his own heraldic design, his family's heraldic design.
The coat of arms, is that what they call it?
Yeah, the coat of arms. The letter's patent authorizing the display cited his high and commendable services, the great perils and dangers he had confronted, and many other brave feats. Now, in May of 1431, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake in Rouen. And Jean de Craon, Gilles de Rais' grandfather, died on November 1432. And in a public gesture to mark his displeasure with Gilles de Rais' reckless spending of a carefully amassed fortune, left his sword and his breastplate to Rais' younger brother, René de la Suze. All right, let's take a moment for a word from our sponsors, and then we'll come back and get into this a little bit more.
All right.
All right, hon, how do you feel?
Sponsored.
Yay!
Do we all feel sponsored?
Do you?
Do you?
I don't know. Do you?
I feel slightly sponsored and slightly sore-throaty.
You feel sponsored and sick.
Now, Gilles began withdrawing from military life in 1434 or 35. Around that time, he began to sell off a lot of property. He built a Holy Chapel of the Innocents, where he officiated in robes of his own designs.
Okay.
He wrote and produced a play called The Mystery of the Siege of Orleans. Now, this play had 20,000 lines of verse. It included over 160 speaking parts and 500 extras.
So, in other words, it was a lot of words.
In other words, years ago, a science fiction writer named Harlan Ellison, whom I just dearly love, he wrote The City on the Edge of Tomorrow, which was a pretty famous Star Trek episode.
Okay.
And his original script has been called unworkable by a lot of people because it involved a lot of extras and whatnot. This makes that look tame.
I see.
Shakespeare didn't do this.
In other words, he was kind of flippant.
Kind of. Now, De Rais sold almost all his property with the exception of his wife's holdings in Polu. And to clarify, he sold almost all of his property in Polu except for his wife's holdings there. He also sold, and he also refrained from selling 2 castles in Anjou to raise money for the play. Now, 600 costumes were created for the show's premiere in Orleans on the 8th of May, 1435. They were then discarded and created anew for subsequent performances. Unlimited food and drink were available for patrons at Gilles' expense. The family tried to go to the Pope and have the Pope intervene. Mostly they wanted him to stop preaching at the Church of Innocents he'd created, the Holy Chapel of the Innocents he'd created. And so they wanted the Pope to basically stop him from doing that. But the Pope refused to intervene. Pope said, you know what? I don't care, basically. So then they went to the king. And they prevailed upon the king.
Like you do.
Who declared Gilles a spendthrift and forbade anyone in the kingdom to enter into contracts with him. This immediately demolished his credit and forced him to move to Brittany, where the Duke refused to enforce Charles's edict. Now, But in making the move, like his creditors were so concerned, he literally had to give up clothes and all sorts of personal possessions that you can still pretty much find in not in Brittany, sorry, but that he left in Orleans, I believe, which is where he was staying at the time, because he just couldn't afford to take anything with him. So, yeah, he withdrew to Brittany, where, like I said, the Duke of Brittany, because of past services, refused to enforce the king's edict, which gave Gilles some breathing room. Now, we also know that Gilles dabbled in the occult. The reason we know that is Gilles gets put on trial later. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But in 1438, according to his testimony at the trial by a priest named Eustache Blanchet and the cleric Francois Prelati, Ray sent Blanchet to seek individuals who knew alchemy and demon summoning. Now, Blanchet contacted Prelati in Florence and persuaded him to take service with his master, that being Gilles de Rais. Having reviewed the magical books of Prelati and a traveling Breton, Ray chose to initiate experiments. The first in the lower hall of his castle at Tiffauges, attempting to summon a demon named Baron, which is spelled Barron, which is how Trump's youngest son's name is spelled.
I see.
That's curiously coincidental to me, but okay. Rai provided a contract with the demon for riches that Prelati was to give to the demon later. As no demon manifested after 3 tries, Gilles de Rais got frustrated with the lack of results. Prelati said Baron was angry and required the offerings of parts of a child. Ray provided these remnants in a glass vessel at a later evocation, but again, to no avail, and the occult experiments left him bitter and with his wealth severely depleted. This brings us to 1440. In 1440, de Rais was upset with a priest over a dispute that occurred at Saint Etienne de Mer-Mort. This prompted an investigation by the Bishop of Nantes. During the investigation, he uncovered evidence of de Rais' crimes. He released his findings, and John VI, the Duke of Brittany, chose to act on those findings and prosecute Ray. He and his bodyguards were arrested on September 15th, 1440. The trial had testimony from peasants from neighboring villages who claimed their children went to the castle to beg for food and were never seen again. The testimony of the parents and Rai's friends was so lurid that the court ordered some of it to be stricken from the record.
Yeah, I can see where you would want to do that. Absolutely.
It was arranged to have de Rais tortured, but he chose to confess instead. He admitted to sexually assaulting children and then killing them or ordering them to be killed afterwards.
Oh my goodness.
Some estimates claim the number of children were somewhere between 100 and 200. Some estimates place the deaths as high as 600.
Oh my goodness.
So Krysta, you want to go to France and hang out with Gilles de Rais?
Let's go to France. I want to put him in the basement.
I mean, he's only been dead for, 800 years.
Yeah.
In the basement. Torture the hell out of him.
So...
But,
Now, in addition, his bodyguards were tried and found guilty as well. Yeah. After the trial, Gilles de Rais asked for permission to be killed first. before his men were. And when he was taken out, what they did was they hung him over a fire. Like just hanging him wasn't enough. They had to hang him.
No, it definitely was not enough.
Over a fire.
Yeah.
So he asked to go first. The court granted him that kindness. And the first thing he said was to his bodyguards. He told them not to worry, but think only about salvation. And so De Rais was hung. He died, but his body hadn't caught fire yet, so they just cut him down. Now his bodyguards were killed in the same fashion, but they let them burn. And there is some question of guilt. It is completely possible that De Rais confessed only due to the threat of torture and excommunication.
Well, I mean, that is true. It's not like they had fair trials back then. It seems a little, I don't know, I don't know. It's insane. I don't know.
So, now, in addition to that, after he died, his land was taken by the Duke and given to the Duke's friends and family.
Okay, and that's where that kind of rolls over into the same stuff that we talked about back when we talked about the Salem witch trials. Because it's almost like, do we actually believe that this actually happened, or is it more of, was this possibly, oh look, here's this guy we're kind of done with. He hung out with Joan of Arc. We burned her at the stake. Now he's done a bunch of stuff. His family thinks he's crazy, and they've turned their back on him. So here, let's turn him into this crazy serial murderer and burn him, kill all of his men, everybody who's loyal to him, and then take all his stuff and split it amongst ourselves.
Right, which is why I had to bring it up.
Right.
Now, in the 70s, there a team of legal experts and experts on various and evidence got together and declared him innocent. However, there are many who say there was no medieval historians in the group, no medieval history experts in the group, so that declaring innocent might be a bit iffy.
Fair enough.
And that is the story of Gilles De Rais. Now, Gilles De Rais is a name I've heard off and on throughout my life because I read a lot of horror stories and a lot of, sort of horrific.
It was pretty horrific. You are not wrong, sir.
Yeah, well, anyway, but he's a name that gets mentioned constantly as this sort of horrific figure from history, but I've never really known who he was.
Right.
So doing this, I actually got to investigate him a bit.
Right.
And the thing is that up until he was accused, he seemed to be a fairly religious guy. But being religious does not mean he didn't do it. And we know that most of the people he confessed to killing were young boys.
Right.
Which, if you're dealing with that sort of serial killer, they have a type.
Right.
So that's all I got. That's all history has. That's all I could find on Gilles De Rais. So, final thoughts, honey?
Well, I think I kind of laid them out already. Just that in piece makes me go, Now, I personally didn't do the research. I didn't get into the reading and stuff. I definitely feel like it's something that I'm curious and may at some point look into myself, because now I'm like, wow. It's one of those the world may never know kind of things, but it seems fishy when we talk about the fact that he still had all of these lands and all of this, and this was split amongst the Duke that finally threw him under the bus and split amongst him and his pals. That just seems.
And there's definitely some truth to that, to that thought process anyway. And it's not the first time, because when we talked about Elizabeth Bathory, there is some suggestion that this very same sort of thing might have happened to her.
Yep.
Krysta, your thoughts?
Okay, but keep in mind that the trial and everything that he went through, that was a totally different legal system than what we have now. Oftentimes people were tortured for days or weeks on end to get them to confess to things. So just keep that in mind.
And that was something else too, is he seemed to, like he wasn't going to confess until they were going to A, torture him, and B, excommunicate him. And those two things together made him go, you know what? I did it. And that to me is that's a coercive tactic. It's hard for me to assign guilt to that.
Right.
I feel like it all goes within the tone of the character that you see in this man. But I cannot, and I mean I cannot, deal with people who are like that. Because the thing in my brain is saying no. Because I have been taught that when you do stuff like that, you are not going to be forgiven. Because I learned that the hard way. And when you learn things the hard way, you learn that you shouldn't do that again. And you don't want to learn it. And that's not how you want to be. And I don't want to be that type of person that goes, oh my god, he should be tortured for longer than that. No, I'm not going to be that person, and I'm not going to be disrespectful to the dead. However, I am going to say this so listen very closely. If anyone today were to do anything like that, I do not respect it at all.
There you go.
And I will never respect it. And it does not change the way I look at things, and it does not change the way they look at things. But I will say, a lot of the people in this world can be very hurtful, and a lot of the people in this world can do bad things. For the people that don't, I respect you, and I hope that you continue on this path. Because the path that you are choosing is the right one, whether or not it feels right. And that's it. And that's all I'm gonna say, because I'm writing. So,
And for myself, I will say, I think there is about a 55 to 60% chance that he may have been innocent of all of this. I say that because even though his friends turned against him, that wasn't uncommon back in the day because, you know, we're talking about a court that was a mixture of a church court and a secular court. And so, and this is the 1400s when the church has a ton of power, and not being a member of the church for the nobility isn't really an option. So, it's just, I don't know, it feels like it could have been a railroad. On the other side of that, though, is what little details we have, he does come across like a serial predator. So I would say 55% chance he's innocent. Plus that whole thing of kill me first before you kill my men. Let me go first. Let me be a good captain. And he turned to his men and was like, think only of salvation. He told them, think only of salvation. And that doesn't feel like something a serial predator would do. Either of those things, those things are kind of more the bailiwick of someone who feels dutiful. And I'm not sure if someone who feels dutiful is going to kill children that are basically his charge, right? He's got to take care of the serfs. Now, mind you, back in Middle Ages, it wasn't done well, but that was their charge. And it just doesn't seem like that would be something he did. But there just isn't enough information for me to so I'm going to say 55% chance he's innocent, but still, even so, if so, boy, he got railroaded good, because writers have since then used him like he turns up in Lovecraft stories. Writers have used him as this sinister figure ever since.
Yep.
Right, but I feel like I sort of, now that I've calmed down a little bit from writing what I'm writing, I feel like he just didn't want to go through all that suffering when he knows he didn't do it. He just didn't care. If he actually did do it, I don't forgive him. But if he didn't, I don't know. Wait, did I already say if he didn't?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if he didn't do it, I hope he got a good seat in heaven, and, he's on the, forever buffet list or something. Like, they've taken care of him up there, hopefully.
I hope. But if he actually did do that, no one did nothing.
If he actually did that, he's burning in the deepest, darkest fires of hell, I have no doubt.
If he's not, Satan, why are you going down on the job? Come on, man, you know better.
You're not wrong.
He's the one that started the people in Hell Want Ice Water. Because he really needs a bucket of ice water right now. If he did do that.
So, we want to thank you for listening very much to the show. Always like to have new listeners. We always like to have returning listeners. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Bill Barrett, the guy that does our theme music. If you need music for a project, Bill's your guy. Just reach out to him via email at billbarrett, and that's spelled BEHRENDT, at sbcglobal.net. Also, thanks to Paige Elmore, who, along with Krysta, did our new logo art. Thank you, Paige.
Thank you, Paige.
And thank you, Krysta.
You're welcome.
And if you're a fan of true crime, Reverie True Crime, which is Paige's show, is amazing. Also, thanks to Aaron Gnurk of the Big Dumb Fun Show, who helps to promote us locally. And join us next week as we go full true crime for our investigation into the Texarkana Moonlight Murders. Bye!
Bye!